And we are recording. Okay, well, welcome to this garden Zoom. I am excited about it. It is March 20th, 2021, first day of spring. I'm going to show you what it looks like. I'm in Alaska. We have a lot of snow on the ground, and it is about 0 degrees. But that's okay because we have over 12 hours of sunlight now, and we are going to be spring is actually coming. I've got lots of seedlings started in my sunroom, and in a future garden Zoom, you can come back and I'll explain all about how to get started. Today I'm going to be talking about, a bigger picture of how to have a great garden. And so I've been actually in love with gardening for over 40 years. And I get increasingly in love with it because it's magical. It's so magical that, like, you just start by putting a tiny seed that's been sitting in a bag probably for who knows how long into some soil, add a little water and add a little light, and magically, this little seed comes to life and little tiny green comes up out of the soil. And then that's magical already. Like, how does that really happen? But then it gets better because now this little tiny seed becomes a big, strong plant that it's like some big, sturdy parts to it. And it might be a flower we planted, like a marigold or snapdragon, pansy, all kinds of things. Could be vegetables. And these vegetables, they start out just tiny sprig. And then pretty soon there are these big, sturdy plants in the garden, like maybe a broccoli plant that grows a great big stalk and big leaves, or might be kale, might be something that grows in the ground like carrots or potatoes. But it's in whatever it is, it's always amazing. And then when we eat these vegetables, those vegetables become us. And that's amazing. So I finished my breakfast a little while ago, and all of those things that were on my plate, in my bowl, have turned into me. They're part of my human body. This is all amazing and magical. And I've been amazed by this for a long time. But now, recently, I've learned more that is even more amazing. And it's so amazing and magical that it's almost unbelievable. And we take so many things for granted. And so much of what happens is in the unseen world. So we don't even recognize how amazing and magical it is. So I took a course this year called the Soil Food Web, and a very in-depth course on microbiology. And it may sound dry, but it is anything but dry. So I made some notes because I don't want to forget anything. So this is what's happening under the ground. And that, we tend to not really think about what's happening underground. We're watching for the little sprig to come up out of the ground. But what's happening under the ground? This is what I call the hidden magic. Now, if you're into gardens, you want to know about all the kinds of magic. But today I want to focus on the hidden magic, because this is what most people don't really know, or if they do kind of know it, they don't necessarily see how to maximize this part of it. And why? Why is it so important? So it's one of the reasons I call it hidden magic is because it's underground, and we don't have eyes that can see through the soil. But besides the fact that it's under the ground, it's also tiny. It's so tiny that it's invisible unless you have a microscope, which I do. I bought a microscope and I can look at the soil, and it's amazing. I'm going to try to show you on a screen. I'm going to share my screen after a little bit and try to show you a picture that I took with my microscope. And I hope I can show it to you, because you'll get an idea too. And again, this is invisible to us if we can't actually look at it through a microscope. Okay, so enough of this buildup. Let's talk about what is this hidden secret. Well, this is the secret. The soil is alive. Most people think of soil as dead. The soil is not dead. It is living, literally living. It is teeming with life. And it doesn't look like it because we can't see that, but it is. So what is it teeming with? Well, it's got all these microorganisms, things like bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, microarthropods. These are all invisible to the naked eye. You have to have a microscope to see them. And then there's the little bit bigger things that you could see if you're looking very carefully at your soil. Things like little tiny bugs, a little bit bigger bugs. And then of course the earthworms, which everybody can see if they happen to be looking at their soil and look at the worms. So one tiny pinch, the tiniest pinch that you could take of this soil has literally trillions of these invisible little microbes in it. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen. I hope this will work. Oh yes, look at them. Okay. Look at that. That is what one thing that I was looking at under my microscope. And what that was a tiny pinch of soil that I put in a test tube. And then I added some water, not very much water, just a few drops of water. And I kind of mixed those together. And then I took a drop of that water and put it on my microscope slide. And then a microscope slide doesn't, this wasn't covering this little part that I'm looking at was just one field of view of that microscope slide. In other words, there's way more in that drop of water that you can't see. But anyway, that gives you just a little idea of it. Now let me see, I'm gonna see if I can see. I'm gonna try to see some of the other, okay. This looks like it's big, but this is zoomed in as much as I could get it. And this is actually a microarthropod. You cannot see this with the naked eye. It's a cute little guy. And here's another one where you can kind of see all these little teeny weeny dots around here. Those are all different kinds of bacteria. And let me see if I have another one. Yeah, here's one. Okay, so this is kind of blurry. This is a nematode, which is a microscopic worm, and an amoeba, and a lot of blurriness. And this big, sorry. So this blob over here on the right-hand side is actually a little piece of organic matter, like a piece of a dead leaf or something, but it also is so small you can't see it with the naked eye. Okay, I'm going to stop the screens here. Anyway, that just gives you a little bit of an idea of a pinch of soil that is literally alive. So I see that some more people have joined us, and so welcome. I'm glad that you are here. I'm going to tell you what I told the others, which is that this is going to be, I'm recording it, and it is going to be on YouTube, and it's not going to be unlisted. So if you don't want your face to show, just stop your video. You don't have to stop it for my benefit, but if, for your own sake, if you want to, you can stop your video. Okay, so now what are all these critters doing? There's these trillions and trillions of all these critters, and they're all in the soil. What are they doing there? Well, they didn't used to know. And first they didn't know they were there because they couldn't see them. But then once they discovered them, they thought, oh, they're not doing anything. They're just there. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. That really doesn't even make sense from nature's perspective. Nature always has a purpose for everything, including us. So what is going on? Well, this is what gets really amazing. So this living soil is interacting with the roots of the plants that are growing in it. This is a really important concept. So the plant is growing and it's got its roots down there. And these roots are all surrounded and even sometimes filled with all these little microscopic creatures. So what are they doing here? Well, for one, let me just backtrack for 1 second. Not only are these underground creatures amazing, the plants are amazing in their own right. Because those of you who have been in my nutrition and cooking class, you've heard me say that plants can make food out of thin air. And they do. They use the energy of the sun in the process of photosynthesis. They take carbon dioxide from the air and they take water and they put those things together and they make sugar. They're making carbohydrates. Charlie? Yeah. Could you call the vet back? They just called and left a message, but I didn't take the call. Okay, so these plants are doing this amazing magical thing of making food out of thin air. But guess what they do with that food? They're not hoarding it all for themselves. They're actually giving about 1/5 of that food that they make to the microbes in the soil. They are feeding those sugars to all those little creatures down there, which I think that's pretty incredible. And so this is, they call these things exudates because the sugar is kind of just seeping out through the roots and into the soil. And so this attracts all these microbes, all these fungi and bacteria all around because that's where the food is. So they congregate around there and they eat and they're happy, they're having a party. But this is in the gift economy. In the gift economy, everybody gives their gifts. It's not just, take, you give what you have to give. So the microbes receive the gift of the plants and then they give a gift to the plants. So the gift that the microbes give is they go out into the soil and they actually are able to take in the nutrients into their bodies that the plants need. Things like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and iron and sulfur and calcium and magnesium and all those soil minerals. Those minerals are tied up in the sand, silt, and clay in the soil. So the microbes and the sand, silt, and clay are all mixed together in the soil. And the sand, silt, and clay is the inert part of the soil. It's the mineral part. It's the different sizes of rocks. Okay, very small rocks, of course. But the microbes are consuming those minerals and bringing them back to the plants in a form that the plants can take up into their bodies, into their roots. And that's really important because the plants can't get the minerals from the sand, silt, and clay. That is not in a form that the plants can take up. So we've got this amazing, magical process happening where the plants are feeding the sugars to the bacteria and the fungi. The bacteria and the fungi are absorbing the nutrients from the mineral nutrients and making it available to the plant in a soluble form that the roots can take up. That's how nature does it. Nature does not feed the plants with a bag of, nitrogen or calcium or something from the store. Nature does this by having the microbes make the mineral components available and accessible exactly where the plants need them, right around the plant roots. And so all of these parts are needed for the magic to happen. You need the plants in the soil. Bare soil does not have food coming down into it. And you need the microbes in order to feed the plants. So they both need to happen together. And so when that happens, I'm looking at my notes. When that happens, then we have a healthy soil that's making healthy plants. And besides the microbes providing food for nutrients for this plants, they're also protecting the plants from diseases and from being attacked by predators. And so a lot of the things that we have problems with in our gardens can be solved by having a healthy soil life. So having healthy soil life needs to be one of our probably the first job on our list of things to do to have a good garden. We must have healthy soil life in order to have a healthy garden, because the healthy plants are the result of a healthy soil life. I hope this is all making sense. And since it's invisible and it's not what many of us have been taught, we've been taught that we need to add minerals to our soil, NPK, nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus in certain percentages that comes in a bag or a liquid that we buy at the store. But that is not the way nature does it. Nature does it through the soil life, bringing those nutrients to the plant. So if we want to garden in a way that says yes to life, which is my focus, is we need to work the way nature works. So our primary job is to take care of our soil. And when I say take care of our soil, I'm talking about living soil. It's like if you have a pet, you need to take care of your pet. You wouldn't just ignore your pet or, walk all over your pet. You would make sure that your pet has, food to eat and all the other needs that your pet may have. So what do we need to do? What can we do to ensure that we have healthy soil so that we can have healthy plants, so we can have a healthy garden, so we can eat healthy food, so we can be healthy? It's all part of the big circle of life. So the first thing we need to do to have healthy soil is we need to be aware that it's alive. That awareness in and of itself can help us to have care for it. We want to take care of it because we know it's alive. Again, it's like your pets. You want to take care of your pets. And so we need to have this awareness and appreciation for the fact that our soil is alive. And we have come to take it for granted so much that, we don't even think of it as alive. Okay, so once we do that, once we have this awareness, then the second step is to stop harming the soil. So one thing we can do to stop harming it is don't pour poisons on your soil. Things like herbicides and pesticides. Anything that says "icide" on it is about killing. Suicide, homicide, pesticide, herbicide. It's about killing. So let's stop killing these microbes in the soil. So that's the first step. Stop harming them. And the good news is that once we have good soil life, that begins to create a healthy condition for our garden so that we don't need, it protects us from the pests and it protects us from even weeds. Even the weeds are not going to grow as much if we do the things that I'm going to be sharing with you. Okay, so stop harming the soil includes don't pour poison on your soil. The next thing is about tilling and plowing. Now, probably everybody here is more of a gardener than a farmer, but it's been the tradition that in order to have a garden, the very first thing you do is you plow the soil or you till the soil. And what that means is you turn it all around and jumble it up and loosen it up. And of course, the goal of doing that is to loosen the soil so that that makes it nice and soft so that the plant roots can get in there. But with what I just told you about the soil, what do you think is happening to the soil life? It's like you had the world's worst earthquake, hurricane, and tornado all happening at once in the soil life. It's like the biggest disaster ever. And it's killing and destroying a lot of microbes, especially the fungi, because they have these long filamentous hyphae, which for the most part are invisible, but it's just tearing them all up. And then they're completely, it's just like being wiped out by a tornado or a forest fire. We're starting back at square one to have these guys have to rebuild, recover. And so every time we go in with a big disturbance to the soil, that's what we're doing. We are creating a natural disaster where all these creatures have to go back in and rebuild their soil structure, because in the process of doing this tilling, we've created it. It's like taking it back to the earliest level of life having to come back from a disaster. So what do we do if we don't till? That seems like, okay, that's a big problem. How are we going to just go out there and plant seeds in the ground if we don't loosen up the soil? Well, I'm not going to go into that today. That's going to be in a future, maybe next week we'll talk about that. But if you understand that the goal is to allow the microbes to have a good place to live, then we're not going to go in and destroy their home. That's the first thing to be aware of. And we do have to disturb it a little bit to put something in the ground, but we don't have to disturb the whole community. We can just dig a little hole where we're going to put things. But starting a new garden from scratch is different than just planting in a garden that you've already had before. So again, that's not the topic for today, even though I know it's like, yeah, but now what do I do? I'm not going to till. Okay, so the other thing besides not turning the soil over and chopping it up and, you know, pulverizing it and breaking it all up, the next thing is that we need to keep the soil covered. Bare soil is not natural. What happens out in nature, if there's any bare soil, the first thing that's going to happen is weeds are going to come in, because that's how nature covers the soil. So remember why we need to have plants in the soil. Remember, it's the root coming down with their exudates of sugar. These are the roots. Don't they look just like roots? So all these microbes are around here eating. What happens if there's no plants growing? Well, they're not getting their sugars. So they can eat other things like dead plants. Microbes can, they break down, they're the decomposers. So like, what does nature do? In the fall, the leaves fall down on the ground, and during the fall and the winter, the microbes are munching on that, and they're, you know, they're eating that. So the microbes eat, let's see, somebody maybe needs to mute themselves. Okay, I just did it. Okay, so if you don't have growing plants in your soil, you need to cover your soil with some kind of mulch. And the mulches should not be black plastic, because microbes don't eat plastic. It needs to be something that is organic. So like dry leaves is great. That's probably the most accessible kind of thing for most people. Compost, you know, you make compost by putting a lot of organic materials together, and then they break down, and so you can put compost on your soil, but don't leave it bare. Now, this is a challenge to our pretty garden concept. speaks to me for sure, because years ago, in order to have my garden look beautiful, I always kept it really well weeded, and in between the plants and in between the rows, nothing, just bare ground. And it looked so beautiful to me, all this beautiful, clean, bare ground. Well, that is the sign that a natural disaster has gone through there. That is not what nature does. Take a walk through the woods. Everything is covered. Everything. Nature does not leave bare soil. So what happens if we do leave bare soil? So, well, for one thing, it starts to kill that soil by not feeding it. So either the living plant roots going down in, giving the sugars, or the dead plant material like the leaves, both of those things are feeding the soil, feeding those microbes. So if those things aren't there, then the food isn't there. So that's one problem. That's a big problem. Another problem is that it leaves it open for soil erosion by, the water washing it away or the wind blowing it away, and also for the sun baking it too much. Now, that's not such a problem in Alaska because we don't have that hot of a sun. But in other places with a hot sun, the soil temperature can get really hot, 120, 140. And that's not good because those soil microbes don't want to live at that temperature. So that kills them. So leaving the soil uncovered is very detrimental, and it's destroying the soil life. And what we want to do is we want to maximize the soil life. The more soil life, the better. So the growing plants is one part of it, and the mulch is the other part. So the way this looks in most people's gardens, a healthy garden would be, you've got your garden plants that have their roots down and they're feeding the sugars. And then in between, you cover all the bare land that's not planted with a pretty thick mulch layer of something like leaves. It could be other things like cardboard and shredded newspaper. That doesn't look so pretty. So I like to put things, you can use even straw or hay or things like that. But you need to cover that soil. There are other ways to do this, to plant other plants down in that soil, like cover plants. You may have heard of cover plants. And these are plants that you probably won't be eating, but they're feeding the soil. And we used to think that this was competition for the nutrients that are in the soil. Like, oh, we don't want to, we don't want anything else to be competing for those minerals that are in the soil. But now we're finding out that's not the way nature works. Look around out in the woods, any undisturbed area. There's all kinds of plants, all growing intermingled with each other, and they're not competing for those things. They're all feeding the soil different kinds of nutrients, which then brings in more of the soil life, which then makes a richer world for everybody. So we have to, pretty much everything we've learned about how to garden is wrong. Just like a lot of other things that we've learned about life are not the best way, like food, what kind of food to eat. So once we keep in mind that this process, the more plants we have, the more they're feeding the microbes. So the more microbes there are, the more they're going out and gathering all those minerals and making it available. So anyway, so we do need to keep the soil covered. Now we have to uncover it at times to make room for the plant that we're going to put in, but then we need to cover it again around it. Okay. Again, I'll get into more of that in a future garden Zoom. I'm planning on doing lots of these this summer because you can probably tell I'm very excited about this whole topic. And the more I learn about it, the more I love it. Okay, so let me see what else is on my list. Okay. That is, okay. Besides protecting the soil and feeding the soil, We also want to maximize the numbers and diversity of different kinds of microbial creatures. And so there are ways to do that. So you've heard of compost. Compost is a combination of lots of different organic materials that have been decomposed by these bacteria and fungi. And so we don't want just the organic material, but we want the bacteria and fungi that are decomposing it. We want to put them in the garden. So we want to have a lot of organic material. And when I say organic material, I'm talking about dead plants, basically, that have been broken down and converted into, humus, which is, the decomposed version of the dead plants. And we want lots of that in as the food, but then we also want to put some microbes in there in case they were not there before. There'll always be some, but we may need to add more. And we can add more by adding a really good quality compost, not all equal. You buy it in a bag at Home Depot, it's not going to be the same as going to a place where you can buy, rich, fresh compost. When I say fresh, I don't mean they just made it that day, but it's like it hasn't been sitting in a bag somewhere for a long time. Okay. It takes a little while for things to break down and make compost. But besides the compost, you can also add things like compost tea, compost extract, some other soil inoculants to get the bacteria and the fungi back into the soil so that they can start to repopulate. Now, if you're starting with, these things are already in the soil to a great extent, but if we've been doing things that have been harmful, like leaving bare soil or not planting in it, we talk about leaving land fallow. Well, now we see that leaving something unplanted isn't the best idea. We need to leave it planted in something so that this whole cycle of life can be taking place. Or maybe we've been tilling. So all of those kinds of things could have damaged our soil life so that we don't have really great soil life. And so adding the compost tea, you can make your own compost, you can buy compost. You can make your own compost tea, you can buy compost tea. If you are wanting to buy compost tea, this is a liquid that has been brewed in a very aerobic environment, lots of oxygen pumped into, bubbling putting lots of air into the liquid with some food for the microbes, and then they just multiply like crazy in there so that you have a big concentration of microbes that you can then spray onto your soil or your plants. You can also spray this on the leaves of your plants, and it will kind of stick to the leaves, and it will not only feed the plant, but protect the plant from pests and from diseases. So compost tea is amazing. There's also other things. Oh, I was going to mention about the compost tea. If you're going to a garden supply store and you see a plastic bottle that says compost tea, don't waste your money, because real compost tea is an aerobic process, and you need to use the tea within several hours of it being brewed. So you're going to have to buy it from someplace where they're making it. And it's not something that you can be having sitting around in a bottle. That's not the real thing. Okay. Now there is something else called effective microbes, which is an anaerobic process, and you can buy that in a bottle, and it is actually effective, not compost tea. I'd be happy to answer more questions about that when we open it up for that part. But basically, just to kind of recap this whole thing, in order to have a good garden and to take care of all the levels of magic, we need to start by having healthy soil. And if we have healthy soil, that means that we need to not disturb it too much, not harm it with any chemical pesticides or anything with a side on it. And we also need to not be putting in the minerals that you purchase. That is usually actually going to work against you. Um, the NPK kinds of fertilizers are not your best thing. What we want to do is to add the soil biology, because the soil biology works as a whole. Okay. So we want to take care of our soil. We want to not till it. We don't want to set it back to being like the worst natural disaster that these poor little guys have ever lived through. And then we need to keep plants in there and to keep it covered. So those are kind of like the basic ideas of how to have good, healthy soil life. And then the next question comes, okay, so once we have decided to do that, how do we do it? And so it depends on whether you're starting from scratch with a brand new garden, or whether you have a garden that you are going to start working with in this new way. And so we'll talk about that in a future Zoom. And it is just about time to be starting seedlings in the house if you start your own. And if you don't start your own, you can be buying those later. Of course, depends on, I know I have some people here not from Alaska, but if you're not in Alaska, you probably will be starting your garden a long time before we do, because we still have a whole bunch of snow on the ground. And if you're a new gardener, it's easier to just buy your seedlings that you're going to put in the ground. If you're a little more advanced gardener, you may want to start your own seeds in the house. So anyway, I have some seeds in the house started, and they're making me very happy. I'm trying to make them very happy. So the magic has begun. So I'm going to stop sharing I'm going to stop recording so that we can open this up to Q&A. So those of you who have been joining online, I'm glad you joined us. I hope you got some great ideas here and can join us in for a future one.